My name is Eric Ellis. I'm the president and CEO of Integrity Development Corporation, and I want to welcome you to Achieving Sustainable Inclusion. I've been working in this area and facilitating these conversations for over 3 decades. Many people might consider me a pioneer in the field, but believe it or not, my father was a pioneer before me. He was born and raised a farmer and went to college to play sports, but ultimately came to Cincinnati with a wife and 5 children to go back and get his PhD in psychology in 1971. He left there to work as an internal consultant for Procter& and Gamble, and then left there to start his own business and to help start this industry. And so you might say that I grew up being diversified from a very young age. So my father was a consultant, my mother was a preacher, and you'll hear a combination of both of those in my voice. We developed this model that we defined as impact to urgency model. And what it says is that our perspective influences our commitment. If you look at organizations, you'll have sort of the executives, C-suite individuals who have the greatest amount of organizational power, but oftentimes the least amount of experience with inequity. And then you move down to HR leaders who have sort of less power than the C-suite, but they have more perspective around inequity because they're working in HR. And then you move to inclusion and diversity leaders who have sort of volunteered to work in this space, who have less power than HR leaders, but they have more perspective around inequity. And then you move to diverse employees who have oftentimes the least amount of organizational power, but the greatest amount of experience with inequity. So oftentimes, if you're not careful, when we look at answering the question, what is the right pace of change? There's a misalignment between the C-suite, who has the greatest power, but the least amount of experience, personal experience with inequity, to diverse individuals who have the least amount of power, but the greatest amount of perspective and experiences with inequity. What I've learned over the last 30 years, there are two major learnings that I've retained over that time frame. Number one is not profound. It's that people are an organization's greatest asset. But number two, people have the answers. And so here's what I would say to you. If there's no way to be an effective leader if you don't spend meaningful time with people that are closest to the work and closest to the customer. If you want to understand more about the different individuals that work in your organization or even live in your community, I would say one of the things you have to do is invest time developing meaningful relationships with people who are different. Leaders oftentimes misattribute discrimination to the character flaws of individuals. Systemic bias within your culture is like the water that carries fish downstream. There was some research that was done on inclusion, and they discovered that oftentimes when we talk about becoming more inclusive as an organization, 65% of our effort is put into fixing people. And then almost 70% of our success comes from improving our systems and our processes. Also, we know that belonging, sort of defined as being part of something that matters to others and feeling that the organization cares. We're seeing that certainly as a result of through the pandemic, when many people were working remotely. Many of them had a chance to take a real clear look at what their company thought about them as a person and whether they truly felt as though they belonged. Especially if they were working sometimes in isolation. We know that when people have a strong feeling, sense of belonging versus a weak sense of belonging, there's a 56% increase in their job performance. In other words, if you're looking for an impact on the bottom line, create a sense of belonging. And so there's a 56% increase in job performance, 50% reduction in turnover. There's a 75% decrease in sick days. And we know that 167 people are 167% more likely to recommend your company as a great place to work if they have that sense of belonging. One of the things that we know is that diversity, equity, and inclusion values. I said this earlier. They shape sort of the views of stakeholders. A lack of diversity can hinder your talent potential, business strategy, and reputation. Our shareholders, workers, employees, suppliers, customers, clients, and consumers are all driving us to become more inclusive. We know that millennials, over 87% of them, are looking at and measuring organizations around how sort of they're doing around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And if they don't see that happening there, then they oftentimes won't choose you as a place to work at. And so if you want to be able to access the greatest talent, then you want to work on creating a more inclusive organizational culture. I'm asking you to sort of think about the things that you believe today. What do you believe about sort of diversity, equity, inclusion, systemic sexism, racism, classism? What if you were to start by assuming that everything that I think I know is wrong? How might I leverage my personal curiosity to allow me to gain culturally competent insights from the people that I work with, the customers that I serve, the suppliers that I'm looking to work with? I'm saying to you, if you do that alone, that decision, that action right there can make a difference. So I want to thank you for the investment of time that you've made in achieving sustainable inclusion. I hope you walk away with a number of things that you've learned. If you want to reach out to us at Integrity Development to ask more questions or find out more information, we certainly would welcome you to come to our website, www.integritydev.com, and follow up with us. And we want to wish you the best.